I really like Deadlock, but every time I play, I seem to fall behind early and lose the lane. If this is you, you're in the right place. This is the ultimate laning guide to Deadlock. We're gonna talk about all the things you can do to make your job and your life in lane easier. From how to control the creep wave, to how to win fights, to how to push and kill the enemy tower, and get as many souls as possible in the process. What's up friends, this is Metro. I've been playing high-level Deadlock for over a year, and today we're gonna talk all about laning, and we're gonna start with the basics and then go into more advanced technique. A lot of people get this very basic concept wrong. In Deadlock, you want to push the creep wave first. A lot of new players and even players that have played the game for a while focus too much on harassing the enemy and focus too much on denying, but we'll get into that later. So, what do you do when you start a laning stage? The first thing you want to do is push enemy creeps. So we're gonna walk up to enemy creeps and just start shooting them. And the most important part about this is that you secure this soul, which is the main income source you have during the laning stage. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but there's actually a lot of tricks or like tricky things about it. Depending on the characters you play against and depending on the hero you have with you in your lane partner, the enemy might start harassing you very early. As I just explained, a lot of people like shooting the enemy players first, right? Which, if you play correctly, is a mistake. Why is that? As long as I keep the creep wave pushed towards the enemy, and I secure my souls and get all the money possible from my souls, what's gonna happen is, because I'm pushing towards the enemy, I will have a creep wave advantage. What is a creep wave advantage? It simply means that I will have more creeps towards the enemy tower than they have on me. And as you notice already on the second lane, we're getting into a stage where I can start putting damage on the enemy tower. So, the way Deadlock Guardians function, unlike other MOBAs, is they will only aggro what is right in front of them, okay? So they will always pick the closest target, which means if you have a creep wave that you're pushing and you're hiding behind your creeps, even if you shoot the enemy players, the Guardian will not aggro you, okay? The Guardian will always aggro the closest creep or the closest target, which means in 99% of cases, pushing the creep wave is most important, okay? So how do you push creeps without taking too much damage from the enemy that's shooting you? Cover is very essential. You want to stay in a position where you can hit enemy troopers and the souls that come out of the enemy troopers while not being hit by the enemy players. Every single lane in Deadlock, left, right and middle, have enough cover to where you can play safely, and a lot of spots where you will be able to hit enemy creeps without the enemy players being able to hit you. And if you do that enough times, again, the creep wave will always end up at the enemy tower. And as long as the creep wave ends up at the enemy tower, again, you will be able to put pressure on the enemy, and this is where you can start focus on harassing the enemy players, shooting them, and they will not be able to trade with you favorably, since they will still have to deal with the creeps. Now, if you're playing a character that is great at harassing the enemy players, like for example Mirage or Haze, that have a build-up effect that does more damage the more you hit the enemy, you can also allocate the pushing part of the wave to your teammate, and you can sit, for example, on high ground in the side lanes and start harassing the enemy players early. But since this is a team game, you need to work with your teammate. And if you're playing with a random in lane, they might not always follow up on what you're doing, right? So essentially, you want to figure out early, well, is my teammate competent? And if they're not competent, focus on your job of pushing the creep wave first. And then you will always be able to get damage in onto the enemy players. And the more you push the creep waves without taking too much damage, the more the enemy Guardian will end up being low, and the more likely you are to win the lane, right? So kills on enemy heroes are actually not as essential. Especially in the early levels, a kill is actually worth less on level 1 than an entire creep wave. So if you go into the lane and you kill 4 creeps, you'll end up with more money than if you go into a lane, kill an enemy, and then don't get the creeps, if that makes sense. So big mistake I see beginners do, or people on all level, is not lasthitting your own souls. That's the very basics, right? Lasthitting your own souls. 50% of the money that you get from creeps comes from the soul secure. So you will get money here if you last hit the creep, but the rest of the money is split into the soul, okay? And it's going to be very easy for you to last hit the soul over the enemy as long as your timing is correct, because in this game there's something that they implemented which gives the player that shoots the creep and the soul a bit of an advantage, right? So as long as I try to secure my souls, which are teal or green, I will have a bit of an advantage, so it should be very hard for the enemy to deny them. Which also means, which brings me to my next big mistake, you really don't want to focus much of your time in trying to deny enemy souls. Because if the enemy is playing correctly, they will have that first hit advantage on your souls, the red souls that pop out of your creeps when they kill them. Which means essentially, if they are fast enough and they have their timing down, you will almost never be able to deny either. And a lot of players try to play it like other MOBA, like especially Dota, where they deny or try to deny their own creeps to get money, and they end up neglecting other parts of the wave, right? So for example, if you're like sitting in the middle of the wave and you're waiting for the enemy creep to go low, right? And you're waiting for this soul to pop up here, and you do nothing in between, right? And then the soul pops up, and then after the soul popped up, the enemy denies it, right? Then you basically ended up with nothing. You just wasted like multiple seconds of your time while the enemy was pushing your wave, and you did get nothing from it, right? So focus on securing your own souls, and especially focus on pushing or killing creeps, but do not focus on denying. You can start denying if the enemy is under pressure, for example. Which, again, when is the enemy under pressure? When your creep wave is crashing into the enemy tower. At that point in time, right, you can shoot the enemy, they're gonna have troubles staying alive, and they still have to secure last hits. So a lot of the time they take cover behind the tower, and that's where you can like sneak in denies, right? Because the enemy is so occupied with like staying alive while shooting your creeps that it's easier at that point for them to miss the perfect timing on the soul deny, and that's where you can get your denies in and get ahead that way, right? And that is one way to get ahead in lane, where you just secure more souls than the enemy. Which, another way to get ahead is obviously killing the enemy. And the same principle applies here. It is usually, unless the enemy completely oversteps and runs into you while the creep wave is pushing into them, it is easier to get damage on the enemy player while, you know, you're pushing their walker or pushing their guardian, because you have creeps in front of you and you will take less damage. Which brings me to advanced strategy. Trading HP is essential to get out on top. If you're full HP and you have a character with great base regen like Warner Abrams, you can trade damage with the enemy. Every character in this game has a base regen, okay? So if you're low and you take damage, there is a base regen a character has, and this differentiates from character to character. Some characters have really high base regen. For example, Warden is a character that comes to mind, and Abrams. They have very high base regen. I think for Warden it is 3 HP a second, okay? And for Abrams, if you level Infernal Resilience, it is even higher. Abrams has one of the highest base regen in the game. So when you take damage on Abrams, you start regenning health really, really quickly, especially if you have extra regen items. So my point is, you really want to treat your HP bar as a resource meter. If you are full HP, your lane mate is low, and you are scared to lose HP, that is the incorrect way to play. You want to think of this as a resource meter. So what I mean by that is, trading with the enemy, if you're high HP, is very good, even if it's an even fight, right? Let's imagine you're full HP, 700 or 870 on Abrams, right? And the enemy player is like also pretty high. Let's say the enemy player is almost healthy, is playing like a 7, and the 7 is on 600 HP. It is always good to take some poke fights and trade with the enemy efficiently, because you will regen your health back, just like the 7. But if you know the base regen of 7, it is actually very low. It's only 1 a second. So you are effectively trading resources well, right? Because you're going to regen more than the enemy. Now, obviously, if you die, it's bad, right? You don't want to die and give the enemy gold. But a lot of the time, if you're like 75% HP plus, you can trade very easily without really being in danger of dying immediately, and can get favorable trades in that way, right? So treat your HP as a resource meter. You can also treat your HP as a resource meter when pushing a guardian, which means if we're getting into a situation like this where my creeps are being pushed, I can tank the tower for a second, get a parry off, right? And not lose a lot of HP, but give my creeps more time to stay alive and get some damage on the enemy tower or a player. Which, next point, I guess, is there is techniques to dive the tower, right? If you play the lane correctly, as I just explained, and you're just shoving the wave, and you're doing it faster than the enemy, once your creep wave ends up on the enemy tower, you can jump in and get a parry down, okay? And when you get a parry down, the Guardian is going to shoot for a second, and it's going to give you time to get damage on the tower, clear the next creep wave if there's one, or dive an enemy player, right? So you can parry and then dive an enemy player and get a kill on them, right? So while Guardians are scary, and if you tank their damage, you will die very quickly, there's ways to negate that damage, right? One is parrying and forcing a melee parry to where the Guardian doesn't do something for a bit, or one is just staying behind your creeps. As long as I stay behind my creeps, I will not get aggroed, right? It will only start shooting me when I'm ahead of my creeps. Every second you're in lane and you're full HP, it's kind of a waste since you're not making use of your HP regen, right? So you're not using your resources as properly as you could by trading damage, you know, and getting more pressure on the lane. Pressuring the lane is the #1 thing you want to think of. It might feel bad, right, when both enemy players are shooting you and you're losing HP left and right, but it's better than your lane partner dying or your lane partner having to leave the lane, get a healing right to regen, or even having to go back to base. Because if you go back to base, you're losing out on multiple creep waves, money, right? And the enemy will get obviously more pressure on your Guardian, right? Getting the Guardian low, and especially after a few minutes in the game, like 5 to 6 minutes, Guardians can die very easily at that time. If you let the enemy players get to your Guardian, and with a full creep wave of 4 creeps, they can end up killing the tower very fast. Another part of advanced strategy in lane is this creep right here, which is the healing creep. The healing creep, which is marked by that little flag he has on his head, heals you and your teammate, if he's next to you, for 40 HP every 6 seconds, okay? So as long as your healing creep stays alive, you will basically have an additional extra regen plus, okay? A healing creep heals more in the early game than the entire extra regen item. So keeping this creep alive is essential. And killing the enemy healing trooper first is also essential. Because every 6 seconds, if you don't kill the creep, the enemy will get back health, right? So even if you're like low, try to focus on killing the enemy healing creep first and keeping healing creep alive as long as possible. And this is, as you saw in this example right here, I got like 3 full heals off my healing creep in one wave, which gave me an additional 120 HP. A very high priority that you can use to just, you know, trade more efficiently. Again, as long as you have a healing creep, and imagine there's an enemy there, you can trade with them very easily, while they will struggle because they don't have that extra regen that is up from the healing creep, right? And I can even, like, again, go in, parry the Guardian, take some damage, because, again, my healing creep is gonna stay alive a bit longer. And yeah, I lost some health there, right? But I got a good damage on the Guardian, and I got another heal off of my laning, of my healing creep. I mentioned earlier, if you have to go back to base, it's really bad, right? The zipline speed boost does not come into effect until like 6 minutes into the game. Before then, going all the way back to base with the zipline and then coming back is very bad. You will end up losing at least a few creeps, if not a full creep wave, which equates to more than 400 souls, which equates to like a half an item that you can buy in the early game. So you almost never want to go back to base. So what happens if you're in the lane and you're starting to get low and you're kind of in trouble? Well, there's multiple options you have. The main 3 right now that are meta, depending on the characters you play, are Healing Rite, Extra Regen, and Resto Shot. Okay, these are items that allow you to stay alive and heal while being in lane. Now, Extra Regen is great on tanks that already have a great base regen, because this just gives you HP over time, and you can keep on pushing and keep on fighting, and you don't really have to worry about anything. Healing Rite, on the other hand, is an item that gives you more healing than extra regen, but you have to activate it. And once you activate it, it's gonna run for a while. Now, the downside to Healing Rite, the reason you don't buy this every time, or the reason you know, it's not the most broken item in the game, is if an enemy player hits you for 1 damage from anywhere, this will cancel immediately, right? So when you buy Healing Rite, you want to stay in cover during the duration and ideally not get hit by the enemy player to get full value out of it, okay? So I want you to think of Extra Regen as a passive item that, you know, helps you stay alive while you can still do your job. While Healing Rite, you will have to play passive for like a wave and a half, right? Until the Healing Rite is out. And a more advanced option is Resto Shot. Resto Shot is a pretty hard to use item, especially for new players, I want to say. Because the way Resto Shot works is, if you hit an enemy player with your bullet, it will regen you for 50, and you can apply this every 6 seconds. The downside is, if you miss it, it will do nothing, okay? So if I miss it, it will go on cooldown, and it did nothing for me. But if I were a god at aiming, and I'm a god at timing, and I look at the timing of Resto Shot every time, and I hit the shot every 6 seconds, it will heal me for 50 every 6 seconds, which is like the highest base regen or healing early on in the game, right? So if you're confident in your aim, and you're confident in, you know, managing that cooldown and looking when it's up, it is a great option. There's also like another effect where you get 15 healing from NPCs, but that effect, if you do the math, is actually weaker than both extra regen and healing right. So if you were to shoot a creep every 6 seconds, it's still not as good as the other 2 items I just named, okay? So if you buy Resto Shot, just be aware you will have to like sometimes look at the bottom left of your screen, look at when it's off cooldown, and try to ideally hit a shot on the enemy player as often as possible when it's up, okay? So these are the main 3 items that will help you stay in lane. And the reason I mentioned them now is because, again, you do not want to go back to base because you will lose creeps. Now, let's say a fight broke out and you won the fight, okay? And you are low, you got kills on an enemy, but you're very low. There is a technique you can do that I'm sure you have seen on my stream and other, if you've watched any, you know, YouTube videos or pro players doing this. There's a technique to where if you're low, you can go up to the enemy guardian and just die to it on purpose, okay? What this is going to do is, it's going to immediately send you back to base because the respawn is very, very low and you're going to spawn with full HP. And the enemy will get no gold from doing this, or no souls, because the enemy players did not participate in it. Now, there is a caveat to that. If you take damage from an enemy player in the last 3 seconds, I think it is, before you die to the guardian, it will count as a kill for the player. So if the fight broke out and you killed, make sure to wait a few seconds, right? And then go in, you know, get some damage on the tower and like basically die to it on purpose. Now, they did nerf this in the recent patch. The respawn time is going to extend a bit longer. If you deny to guardians, it's still worth it. In the early game, it's like something like 7 seconds, right? It's still faster than going all the way back to lane with the zipline, healing, and then going all the way back into, like, from lane back to your base and back again, okay? Now we can, I guess, talk a bit more about specific matchups. Deadlock is obviously a very complex game, you know, there's a lot of characters in the game, and if you do the math, there's like basically infinite possibilities of lane matchups, right? Because you have 2 different characters in lane and the enemy has 2 different characters in lane. So encountering the same lane matchup is very rare in this game, right? Depending on the lane you play, you might have to play more passive or more aggressive. Some characters in this game are really good at laning, and some characters in this game are really bad at laning, right? The characters that are bad at laning usually have a trade-off for that. So for example, I can give you one. Wraith does very low damage in lane, and before you get cards to level 2, she's one of the weakest laners, if not the weakest laner in the game, because she just does very little. But Wraith, you know, as a trade-off, gets very strong late game instead, right? So it's like a hard carry character that struggles in lane. On the other hand, Yamato, for example, is one of the characters that is insane in lane in almost all matchups, because Yamato has a right click that applies ridiculous damage in an AoE, and Yamato can use this to her advantage, where she can just harass enemies from long range and get a lot of damage in. And if the enemy decides to come close, right, you can also use your Crimson Slash to regen HP and stay healthy that way. Plus she has a nuke that does insane damage, right? So you really need to kind of know what good and bad laners are for this. So this is a short general overview of what characters are really, really strong in lane. Characters like Yamato and Sinclair that do high burst like damage and high damage over time while having sustain like Yamato. Holiday that can like put a lot of pressure on the enemy with crack shot and the barrels. Mina, who got buffed recently and does insane damage with the 3. And characters like Mo and Krill that really don't die because they can use Scorn on creeps and regen HP over and over. And Viscous are just insane laners. And you can agree or disagree with some of the takes in this list, but overall I think this is pretty accurate to where, you know, most laners are pretty or most characters in lane are pretty solid or strong, and then there's a few characters that are just kind of weak and fall off in the laning stage. And that does not mean you cannot win the lane at all with these characters. The most important part about winning the lane is still your own skill. You just have to know that it's gonna be a bit harder for you depending on the matchup on when to win the lane. And sadly, in this video, I can't really explain to you what matchup is good against which one, because there's so many possibilities and so many different scenarios that it's really, really hard to cover everything. So yeah, take this as like a blueprint. All you should really know is how good your character is in lane, and if you are just starting out Deadlock or you're playing for a bit and you play like 1, 2 or 3 characters, it's going to be easier for you because All you really have to do is learn the matchups for those 3 characters, and over time, if you get a few games in, you know, like after 50, 100 games, or maybe even 10, you will have maybe a decent idea of what your character can get away with in lane and if you can win the lane. Now, worst case scenario, if you're in like a disadvantaged lane, right, you will kill the enemy creeps a bit slower than the enemy will kill yours. And at that point, you know, you'll just have to deal with like 1 or 2 creeps coming through at the end at your tower, right? Which I guess brings me to another item that is super, super great if you feel like you're struggling with pushing the lane. It's Monster Rounds. Monster Rounds allows you to put more damage on enemy creeps while also taking less damage from them. Which means if you buy this item, which is multi-versatile, almost great on any character in the game. If you buy this item, the enemy creeps are gonna die faster. Plus, you have this added bonus effect to where you don't take as much damage from them, which, by the way, works on the Guardian as well. So if you end up at the enemy Guardian, it will deal less damage to you by 25%, which means it's gonna be easier for you to push the enemy Guardian and get a kill on it. Okay, so Monster Rounds, great option. And then there's offensive options that you can use. If you feel like, okay, I'm pushing the wave into the enemy tower, but then I can't really get damage on the enemy because, like, you know, by the time the wave of mine is at the enemy tower, they kill it pretty fast, right? There's offensive options in lane that are universally great that deal damage, okay? One of them, the most obvious one, is Headshot Booster. This item is actually pretty easy to use. The way it works is every 8 seconds, if you hit a headshot, it will deal bonus damage to the enemy, okay? And the good part about this item is, even if you miss the head and you, let's say you shoot the enemy and harass them and you hit the body, notice how it doesn't go in cooldown. So as long as you hit a bullet, you know, at some point it will trigger. So it's not a hard item to use, it's way more forgiving than Resto Shot, and it's the highest DPS option in early game that you can buy as an item to get additional damage in, right? You don't buy this item on every character, because some characters it's just harder to hit headshots with. So let's say, for example, you're playing a shotgun character where you need to hit the middle pellet, right? Like let's say you're playing like an Abrams or a Pocket. Headshot Booster is probably not your #1 choice, but for characters that can hit headshots somewhat reliably, which is a lot of the cast, most of the cast, this is a great item to harass the enemy in lane. Other great options, if you want to play aggressive, is Backstabber. Backstabber is one of the most broken items in the game right now. It's completely overstated. What it does is, it gives you health, it gives you damage if you hit them in the back, and it reduces the enemy bullet resist and gives you movement speed. So on a lot of builds, on a lot of characters, you will see this item being bought very early in lane. And the reason being is, you don't actually have to shoot their back to proc this. The way Backstabber works is, if the enemy player dashes away from you, they will have their back to you for a second. So if they dash, while they look at you, and you shoot them, you will actually proc the Backstabber item for whatever reason. And I don't know if they're gonna fix this eventually, but the way it works right now is, let's say I'm shooting him, he's shooting me, and he's dashing. Notice how I just proc Backstabber on him, while he was technically looking at me because he was facing away from me for a second because of the dash. And this works on every character in the game. And then when you have Backstabber on them, right, they will take a lot of damage, you will do more bullet damage to them, and this is especially great, again, if you're pressuring the enemy tower. Because if your wave is crashing on the enemy tower, and the enemy is taking cover behind it, and you keep on shooting them, you keep on putting damage into them, eventually they will dash away from you if they're scared, or they will actually run away, turn around, and you will proc Backstabber very easily. So this is also a great item to harass in lane. And in general, if you look at most builds, on most characters, they all focus around either pushing the creep wave faster, or getting damage on the enemy to win the lane that way, right? Some characters do really good damage on base against creeps, and some don't. So for Wraith, for example, she's not great at damage overall, right? So in a lot of Wraith builds, you will see Monster Rounds. Let's look at a character like Infernus, right? Same principle, definitely better in lane. On Infernus, if you hit like enough bullets on a target, they will burn and you can get damage on them over time. And notice how in most Infernus builds, if we look at like something like Buds, who's a really good Infernus player, again, same idea with items, right? Buds takes the passive route and focuses on staying alive and dealing damage to pushing the enemy way faster. But it's all personal preference, because I can almost guarantee you, if you look at someone like Zergy, notice how Zergy puts more pressure and damage on the enemy. Zergy buys rapid rounds as second item. The reason rapid rounds is really good on Infernus is because if he shoots the bullets faster, he can apply the burn faster, right? So it's like the best damage option for Infernus compared to Headhunter because of the ability. And this really goes for every single character in the game. In lane, whenever you have the money, is really essential, because in the early game, every single item, even an 800 item, is a major power spike over the enemy, right? So if you don't spend your money and the enemy does, suddenly they will actually deal a lot of damage to you. And again, same idea, right? Close quarters. Kelvin is a very tanky character that can do a lot of damage early in the gun. Early on with the gun. So close quarters, and then extra charge for nade, so you can do more damage with the nade. So my point really is, early game items are usually items that immediately help you in the lane. Some people love going defensive and buying Battle Vest and Enchanters really early as like first or second item in lane. I completely disagree with this. I don't think it's great getting it early, because if you buy them that early, this will lower your damage, right? If I were to buy like something like close quarters headshot booster, where I suddenly do a lot more damage close range and I do more headshot damage, right? It's a better trade-off than just having a bit more resist and a bit more HP and regen, to where I don't take as much damage. An aggressive approach is always better than a defensive approach. And this goes for everything Deadlock, by the way. This is not a lane-specific thing. The players that aggress are usually the players that win. For every scenario in the game. If you aggress and you push the enemy wave and you put damage on the enemy, it's better than playing passive, reacting, and trying to like deny the enemies, right? Like sitting there and waiting for the enemy souls to pop up and trying to get the denies off, right? The greedy playstyle. Be proactive, be aggressive in lane, and as long, again, I can only reiterate this, as long as you take enough cover while shooting the creeps, like, as long as you take cover and shoot the creeps, you will eventually just end up on the enemy tower more and win the lane that way. And that is really everything there is to know about laning in this game. Again, trying to cover the basics. It is always hard in a complex game like Deadlock to cover everything. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you liked it and you want to learn more, make sure to check out my other guides. We're going to release guides on a lot of the characters. We just released a Billy guide. We also have a guide on items in Deadlock. Or if you want to learn about everything, we have a very basic beginner guide about everything Deadlock. Next video coming out, hopefully, is going to be a macro guide. So we're going to talk about how to get money throughout the game and how to play the game correctly in a major sense. And yeah, let me know what you want to see next. And until next time, see you friends. Bye bye.